They call him the company whisperer.
Kirk Dando.
Kirk Dando.
And Kirk Dando.
Kirk Dando.
Ladies and gentlemen, Kirk Dando.
Yeah, I'm really excited. In the last episode, what I'm doing in these first two episodes is really giving some what I would call diagnostic tools to kind of really test and see the health of a business. We haven't got into, and we'll get into those in future episodes around more of the how-to, more of the tactics of things. But today, we're going to talk about business life growth cycle, something that I came up with a number of years. And really what I want people to do is, and what they'll learn is how to map where their company or their division or department is at in their stage of growth, and really what that means to their strategy, to their structure, and more importantly, to their leadership. And I also want people to be able to recognize what we're talking about. What this podcast is largely about is that messy middle. We said, and I've said this a number of times, you alone can do it, but you can't do it alone. And the reason for that is that's a catchy little phrase, but the truth of the matter is it does get lonely. Mm-hmm. And so I want people to recognize that oftentimes what feels like chaos, what feels like stalling out, what feels like problems aren't. But that's that time when we start to give in and then we give up. Mm-hmm. And what I want to help people do to understand that it's actually normal. And because it's normal, it's predictable. And because it's predictable, it's solvable. We get to make that choice. I say a lot of times the road to heaven does go through hell. And it's worth it.
Yeah.
But it's your choice if it's a day trip or a daily trip. Today, we're going to hear about how, growth pain is inevitable. It's part of the journey. But misdiagnosing the problems, that's optional. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then I want people to really understand and discover how the most effective leaders are using this business growth lifecycle to align their teams, to create those open, transparent, strategic conversations, and really avoid misdiagnosing the problems and spending time and energy, emotional energy and money on solving the wrong problems. And really get them to move from that reactionary firefighting, chasing our tails type of things, to being more intentional with scale. So we're going to talk about that. And the last thing is I want people to hear why reaching what I call a level 3 company. That's a company that's professionally managed and led, but it's still entrepreneurial and it's investor attractive business. Why achieving that level 3 business is so rare, and how we can get there, how our listeners can get there.
We've got a loaded discussion today. Sounds like lots to cover. Before we get into kind of the meat of today, we talked about the idea of normalizing the journey. I've got this lovely printout that you've given me here.
Old school.
Yeah, here, normalizing the journey. What does it say here? What is normal and what is not for companies that get and stay on top? The idea here that we're discussing together is it's not about how, we race to the top and don't have the tools to stay on top. It's about this idea of staying on top. And I want to touch on this first from the idea of normalizing the journey, the feelings, the chaos, the things that, it may feel like everything's going wrong. You said in the first episode, nothing kills faster than success. Can you talk a little bit about that just before we get into all of this? What is it that a CEO might be experiencing as they kind of go through this episode and say, oh yeah, that resonates with me, just to give them kind of an idea of what they may or may not hear in this that represents, how they're feeling.
So we're going to talk a lot about that through this podcast and through the other podcasts, because in the book I wrote, when I go through what I call the 12 warning signs of success, which we'll be covering throughout these handful of episodes that are following this one, where we get into more of the details, I end each one with know this, talking a little bit about what you should understand and be aware of. Feel this. And so the feeling part of what you're talking about is, really what I want people to understand is not just this is normal and these are the things that happen. And if they're happening to you, don't feel bad about it. Sure, that's part of it. But the reality of it is when we can predict and prepare versus reacting and repairing, what that does, a subtle thing that does, but it's a significant leadership tool, is we reduce fear. anxiety, hopelessness, wondering if you're my leader, do you even know what you're doing?
Mm-hmm.
So we reduce that and we increase focus. Every company needs increased focus and clarity. And so those feelings that we're going to be talking about is I do want people to not just feel, hey, this is normal, this is okay. That's a part of it, but it's really the follow-on of what I'm interested in and what I've learned, and the leaders I've got a chance to coach and grow alongside is that when they can get their head in the game and they can get that leadership credibility by being able to talk about what's going to happen in the journey, get the team to have open, aligned conversations, strategic conversations around those things, the feelings shift from, I don't know what I don't know. Every day is a new day. I've never done this before. I've only done this once or twice before, to conviction, to confidence, to competence. And you transfer that in how you lead. So the things that we'll talk about today and this journey and normalizing the journey, once again, these are all, nice catchy words and things that maybe are anchors for people to be able to remember these things by. More importantly, what I want people to do is hear that there is a real messy middle.
Mm-hmm.
Even the unicorn founders experience the messy middle, and that's okay.
Yeah, right. Well, to reference a quote that you had in the previous episode from the late Tim Keller, it's someone that we both admire greatly.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about how success, has a way of going to the head, but that failure has a way of going to the heart. And I love what you just said, connecting that knowing and the feeling in this, and that it's a journey and it's comprehensive of all of that. And so we're going to kind of hit this from multiple angles. It sounds like you've got a lot of experience, 30 plus years of working with companies, this business growth life cycle. This is a resource we're going to have you sketch out here in a second, but it's also something we'll put in the show notes and be able to give this PDF to people to have a tangible asset to really help them, not just listen to this podcast and then kind of forget about it later, but really have something tangible to look into their own business and their own leadership and walk away with some insight for.
Yeah. And there's really, each of these episodes is where we're, you and I've talked a lot about this. We're leaving it all on the line. You know what I'm saying? These are things that I've shared, inside of, many, many conversations over the years. These are, assets. A friend of mine, Sam Decker, calls it my magic notebook of ways that I've learned and seen and experienced what works, what doesn't, and we're going to be doing those. And one of those things is this tool that I want to be able to give to people today. And as we talk through the business growth lifecycle, there's a couple things I want people to be able to understand: the stages of growth that every company goes through and grows through. And so I want them to have that tool, because when you can understand that journey and you can communicate that journey, as we talked about in the last episode, it's kind of like if we're going up Mount Everest and I tell you what's going to happen before we get there. I reduce your fear and I increase your focus. So when we get to 24,000 feet and you can't breathe and you feel like you're in the death zone, because you are in the death zone, but you're only 1,000 feet away from the goal, your focus is more intense. Because I told you what's going to happen. We are going to need oxygen. You are going to feel like your body's starting to give out on you. You're going to be cold. You're going to be tired. And you're going to be a winner. Because you know how many people get to this point? Not very many. And we're almost there. Versus if I don't tell you what's going to happen and we get there and I put on my oxygen and you're like, that would have been a nice thing to have known. I would have been like, everybody knows this. Like, haven't you read the books? Haven't you seen the shows? Everybody, you didn't know this? Like, really? And you're like, yeah, I've watched the shows and I've done this, but I didn't, all of a sudden I've increased your fear and reduced your focus. I've turned those over. It's a mental game. Anybody that thinks that growing a business is not hard and tough is not living in reality or hasn't truly experienced that. You don't think there's other competitors out there that would like to have your customer? You don't think there's teammates and employees that are desiring to understand, what does winning look like? How can I contribute to that? And too many leaders are just focused on the destination and forget to celebrate the journey. And so I want people to understand those stages of growth. That stage one, that startup, and what happens. That stage 2, that rapid growth, where really things come together. And we're going to talk about this in a more detailed way. And that, what I call that level 3, that professionally managed and led, but entrepreneurial business. And what are the characteristics? And why are those companies so valuable and investable and scalable? The other thing is I want people to identify the characteristics and the problems at each level, not just so they can kind of, passively understand those things, but so they can actively use those and use it as a tool to be able to start communication with the team and say, hey, Spencer, are you seeing these things? Like, are these? And you're like, yeah, you know what? That's kind of where we're at. And all of a sudden you're leaning into the conversation, and we've changed the dynamics of that. The other reason I have this and built this tool is back when we were growing our company, I needed a way to cause the team, I wanted to give them a tool that would help them understand why 90% of companies don't make it to becoming a level 3. But more importantly, what I wanted to do was give us a tool. And I've given this tool to many leaders, and they've used it this way to create open, aligned, strategic communications, not just amongst the leadership team, but so it ladders up and down. So it almost makes it where we can talk about the root cause issues and not the symptoms of those issues. Mm-hmm. And that's tough sometimes. We'll talk about that. Sometimes the issue, unfortunately, is a person that's sitting in the room. Yeah. And we're going to talk about that in some upcoming episodes, and how to, make those tough decisions earlier, cleaner, without less collateral material. And then the other thing I really wanted the tool to do is help redefine what success looks like. Redefine what success means. Obviously, it's, these big exits. That's what everyone's going for. And that's, if you aim at nothing, you'll hit your target. So that's okay. But what I want to help with our listeners redefine is, what is a definition of success? What about if it's the journey to becoming a level 3 company? Once again, professionally managed and led, still entrepreneurial, investor attractive, for either acquisition, funding, exiting, whatever the case may be. And why level 3 companies? It's not just about the greatest leaders I've worked with and known. They don't want something just from the business. Mm-hmm. They want something for the people. And level 3 companies have a much happier, much more fulfilled, much more focused set of people on the team, customers, investors. Life at home is a little bit better. I'm not saying this is a panacea where everything is like, it's rainbows and unicorns. That's not what I'm talking about here. But what I am talking about is that ability to see what's coming, not get emotionally tugged down, start to tell ourselves those sweet little lies we've talked about that become those big, bad whopper lies that cause us to lose focus and really threatens our ability to lead. Mm-hmm. So that's what this tool's about. That's what this episode's about, is giving people another diagnostic tool. Last time we gave them the CEO growth gauge on how to really look at the health of the business. We talked about the TEM, the TEM, the thesis, execution, and the macros, how to really understand what's happening in their business when things are speeding up or slowing down, where to go apply the right focus so we don't spend time and money burning things. And that's what this episode's about, is this diagnostic tool.
That's helpful. So there's something you said in that I think is crucial. And I think what you're actually describing is this idea of building a culture from the top down, that the leader of the company owns culture within the company. And that culture actually permeates in the way that you lead to the successful exit, the way that you get the results. And a lot of that, just like you said in the growth gauge and that you drew out, is that you take accountability and you take communication. And when you start with clarity and you inform decisions with alignment, that's how you get to where you're trying to go. But there's 2 questions that you said in that I think are crucial, that we would encourage all of the CEOs and listeners to be asking, and also enabling people or challenging people in the business to ask, which is, what does winning look like? And how can I get involved? And there's not enough companies today out there that, are enabling those people. Like you said in the informing decisions part of the CEO growth gauge, you talked about the idea of, you want the most junior person feeling the ability to go and do all of what they were hired to do. And we'll talk a little bit here in the next episode of, getting the right people in the right spots and how you gauge performance and all of that. And I think that's going to be a really critical part of this. But then also just inspiring this culture of, how can I get involved? And you can't get involved if you don't know what the trajectory looks like. You don't, you know, if there's no target, like you said, if you aim at nothing, you're going to hit it 100% of the time. So to kind of spin that on its head, is this, you know, the model you're going to walk through today, is this just here's how we make money and raise money, or is this something deeper than that?
It's much deeper than that. And this is really meant to arm, once again, it's, you know, CEOs are at the tip of the spear, but I also want people who are active angel investors or venture capital or private equity or even banks that are helping fund and make decisions about how they deploy their customers' capital, to understand that these are tools that help cause us to get clarity around the right conversations. These are at the heart of the matter. And I've done this long enough. Sometimes people are like, oh, that's just dime store advice. And then they come back to me and they're like, everything kind of keeps leading back to these same conversations.
Yes.
And the fact of the matter is human beings, we just don't get rooted in the truth. And what this is causing us to do is get closer to the truth of what's going on. Because like I said, we're playing a real game here, not in a game where it doesn't matter, but a game that matters tremendously. Once again, people are depending upon being able to make their car payments, their mortgages. Customers are depending upon the service or the product they have is working.
Mm.
And it's not like we have to live at this high level of intensity and just, you know, but the things that we're going to share today go far beyond just the surface things of, yeah, we need money. That's like oxygen. We need that to live. Like those are table stakes. You've got to have that. But in order to have somebody come and unlock and give you their hard-earned resources or someone else's that they've been entrusted with, they've got to have a good enough reason to do that. And so the tools and the diagnostics and this whole series, this whole season that we're going through is meant to get to the heart of the things that over 30 years, over 16,000 different conversations, where all the tributaries are coming back to, these are the things that matter. These are the conversations that need to be had. These are the truths that aren't just Kirk's truths and not just universal truths. These are things, we have so much historical and transactional data, not just me, but across all businesses on what works, what doesn't, and what causes us to get locked up. And part of that is there's a mental part of the game that doesn't get played well. In fact, oftentimes it's in the background. That's what creates that back channel chatter when the meetings are happening in the hallways and not in the actual room. When people are wondering, how do I contribute to this? But if I raise my hand and ask that question, I'm going to expose that, you know, I don't understand. Or I've talked to many CEOs that said, I don't understand why they don't understand. I've told them like 10 times. And I said, well, have you asked them once to repeat back to you what your expectations are? And they're like, no, but I've told them 10 times they should have gotten. I'm like, just ask them. They'll ask them and they'll feed it back to them. They'll be about 90, 95% right. And it'll be that extra little 5% that they missed or didn't hear or misunderstood that throws them off. All of these things, all these tools that we're talking about are going to help lead back towards that.
All right. Well, let's translate that into just taking this idea, you know, so we've talked about source of truth for your leaders, normalizing the journey, going, you know, basically in the midst of chaos. How do we see the map, right?
Yeah.
And understand where we're going. And this concept of, yes, everyone wants a successful exit. Yes, we all want to make money, to raise money, to make money, and so on, and then hit a point of an exit. Walk me through the stages here. You've got 3 stages to this life cycle. Let's walk through that and let's talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, well, I've sat here too long without markers in my hands. So
yes,
I need to get some markers.
I got crayons in the back corner over
yeah,
here,
exactly.
so we can get those out next.
Yeah, we'll color with those things. Yeah, just as a quick reminder, I mean, this is a tool that I want people to understand those stages of growth that their company goes through. Not just understand it, but understand how that impacts their strategy, their structure, their leadership, and what they bring to these things. The other thing, I want people to use this tool as a team tool. Use this tool to help people understand why 90% of companies do not make it to level 3. And more importantly, be able to identify those transition points that happen in a business and prepare for those crisis zones. Those crisis zones that really end up breaking most companies and leaders. I want them to use a tool to cause that as a conversation for people. And that's what this tool, Normalizing the Journey, that people will be able to get in the show notes. And the other thing is I want people to really think about, maybe this is a way to redefine success, is the journey to becoming a level 3 and the celebrations that come along with those things and the tough things that happen with it. So let's draw.
Let's do it.
All right.
All right. So we've got you. No crayons. Didn't find the crayons.
No.
We've got markers.
Yes.
All right. So we're going to talk about 3 different levels here. Level 1, organization, entrepreneurial startup. Let's go ahead and start mapping this out a little
Okay.
bit.
All right. So this is, once again, this is a model that I came up with a number of years ago to really kind of humanize the messy middle of growth and that growth process. So over here is we have growth. And this is just the element of time. All right. So every organization goes through and grows through what I call 3 stages of growth. And component parts are different stages. This is an approximation of what happens. This isn't an exact, like on this day at this dollar amount, you are, it's not that kind of thing. It's more meant to be, once again, to create conversation, to create that open, aligned, strategic discussions that we all want to be having. We want to be reducing fear, anxiety, doubt, increasing focus and clarity. So this is just another tool, another diagnostic to be able to do that. So we have that level 1, that level 2, what I call that level 3 company. That company that's professionally managed and led, still entrepreneurial, and it's attractive to investors. So we have this level 1 business. There's some businesses that just become what I call permanent small business. That's probably, not, especially if you're venture backed or PE backed, that's not, but there's some real successful ones out there that just make that choice to have, 1 or 2 locations or a unique service or whatever. And those are great businesses, and they have their own characteristics and their own problems. We're talking about companies that are growing real quickly here. So we have what I call that level 1 or that phase 1 business. And that's that startup business where really some of the characteristics are the founders are usually uniquely and purposely involved in the day-to-day business. As I say, they're working more in the business than they are working on the business. Our primary focus is really developing a product or service, kind of honing in on that thesis, that product market fit, getting clarity around that, and raising some money if we need to kind of help fund the journey. And so part of it is some of the other characteristics are it's a fun time. We're building things. We're getting out of especially if we're a first or second time CEO and we're it's a startup environment. It can be somewhat anxiety producing, but for the most part, it's kind of exciting. It's kind of fun, especially if you enjoy putting teams together and getting them kind of aligned. The communications are less formal. We don't need really sophisticated processes to, implement our strategy and have all these, overly sophisticated, hallway meetings work just fine. And so it's a fun time when we start to grow, and we come to this first inflection point here. We'll call that growing pains. You oftentimes hear people, we're having growing pains, and they kind of give different adjectives and descriptions of it. And there's really 2 things that that need to be addressed here. One is we start to see where the leadership needs to start to evolve a little bit. This is one of the things we're going to talk about in one of the upcoming episodes is, it's that that truth and that difficulty, that leadership truth, that evolving the team oftentimes hides future liabilities. That our team success today is starting to maybe hide some of our future liabilities, but it's a fun time, and we're starting to collect people and get people. We're starting to see where people's skill sets are, and the leadership has to understand the cause and effect relationship between a balance sheet and a profit and loss statement. What are truly our critical key? We talk about KPIs, key performance indicators. What truly are those? What knobs do we need to pull to create what is the rule of 40, and how does that work, and those kind of things. So you start to see where it's more than just, typically people that that are the founders, and they put people around them are either really great technically, they understand the technical components of the business, or they're really good market builders. They really know how to go out and sell and develop and business development. They're typically not great people and process managers. I mean, they're smart enough they can do it, but that's not where their highest talent and effort is. So we start to see where we need a shift there. And then we also see where we're starting to need for some systems and processes that create these predictable outcomes, whether it be our people processes of how we're hiring, how we're promoting, how we're going about writing job descriptions, and then our internal systems. How do we make sure the trains are running on time? So we start to see where we have to start build some sophistication around those things. But if we have a good product or service, if our thesis is starting to prove out, we move into this, what I call this rapid growth, or a phase 2 company.
Before you get a phase 2, so what's like the roundabout size of team, or does size of team even matter in phase 1?
I mean, I don't know that it matters, but yeah, it's usually it's usually anywhere under probably 50 people is typically the case, depending upon how you're tracking your revenue. I mean, it depends on what kind of company too, right? I'm talking about high growth, typically high tech companies. Construction company is going to be a little bit different than an insurance agency or whatever the case may be.
Okay.
So kind of business type matters probably more than company size. I think the kind of companies you're thinking about, it's probably under 50 people.
Okay. That's helpful.
Roughly.
Yeah.
Is what
That's
happens.
helpful.
So we move into this rapid growth of phase 2. And this is where it's fun. We're starting to see our thesis is coming to life. That thing that is our right to win. Our ideas and our concepts about what we thought was the unique angle that was being missed or overlooked or not serviced well is starting to come to life. And this is where it really starts to take off. We're starting to get, the swag, maybe, we're starting to hire more. The board meetings are a little bit more fun because, it's not, once again, it's never just up and to the right type of thing. This goes up and down. I didn't draw it exactly how it happens, but this phase 2 business is where that's that validation. That is that messy middle. Then oftentimes, this is where sometimes we're mistaking an up market for our own brilliance. I've seen that happen.
Yep.
Or I've seen, also times where the growth we start to get into like, well, let's pivot over here and let's add this, component. Let's add this feature. And so we start to see where, some of the problems we grow ourselves into is broken or spread out focus. One of the things we'll oftentimes see is the wrong person in a key position. That happens. And we're going to be talking about that in an upcoming episode, and how, making good people decisions is hard and making tough people decisions is hard. But once again, that's just part of this journey. The other thing is sometimes we'll see where, role clarity is not what it needs to be. People will have titles and vague responsibilities, but we'll see where what are they responsible for? And you start to see where the org structure starts to maybe get a little bit confused, even though we have one drawn up. But the one that's typically drawn, I don't typically see that's the way it's actually functioning. Org structure drives behavior, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. But nonetheless, this is a fun time we're going, and we come to this next inflection point, or this transition point, and this one is a crisis. This one you can brute force your way through. Like I said, if you have a good product or service for what you're doing, you can brute force your way through that one. And what happens is, when we say nothing kills faster than success, well, what's happening is success starts to mask some of the issues that are robbing us of our full potential. But because things are going so well, we think, maybe we're the ones that are going to be able to kind of blow through this. And you hear stories about companies that are getting sold, and it's like, man, that's so cool that they got sold and everything else like that. Behind the scenes, what you don't know is, everybody that had common shares got wiped out. Maybe it was from how it got financed. In a future episode, we're going to talk about financing and how sometimes this journey of growing got hurt right from the beginning, and how you raised money, depending upon the terms. The terms matter, as much or more than the money that you collected. But nonetheless, we come to this crisis point, and this is really key. There's really 3 things that need to be addressed that hold these companies back. The first one is we've got to have what I call as an aligned leadership, team. And we talked in the first podcast about alignment doesn't just happen. It starts with a level of clarity. Once you have that clarity, then you can communicate. Once you have good forms and processes and highways and byways of communication, you can create informed decision makers. Once they're informed, now they're aligned on what's doing it. Once you're aligned, then you can create that decision velocity. Well, this is a dynamic. I want to kind of draw a physical representation of what happens here. So let's say the circle represents the company, okay? And you've got a group of leaders that are responsible for cussing and discussing, setting the direction, communicating that direction, raising the money, hiring and firing, all the different components that go into any good, healthy, and thriving business. Well, they get together and they get off maybe at an offsite once a year. They have, quarterly meetings, maybe weekly discussions. They're even called strategy meetings and things like that. But if you look at them, they're actually perpetuating more confusion than they are clarity. Obviously, that's not what they're trying to do. Once again, this is getting back to that truth. If you could listen to the business, meaning, and that's what I do, I get in and listen to the business. If you can get in and really hear what it's telling you, it will tell you where there's confusion. It will tell you where there's clarity. It will tell you where it needs help. But we're going to talk about one of the warning signs, open door. I have an open mind. Open door, closed mind. I tell people I want to hear it. I want to know it. I don't want to be caught in this iceberg of ignorance where everything's happening below and it never, ever gets to the surface. But there's actually a closed mind. And so in this company, what it is we stack hands. We think we're in agreement. We've got good OKRs. We've got good KPIs. We use this, this operating system that helps us, whatever the case may be. And you get out into the organization and this is what the communication looks like. Sometimes there's people maybe just aren't sure where we're going. Well, that's okay, but what that does is that broken kind of communication, that confusion, that creates what I call scattered focus. What does scattered focus get you? It gets you scattered results. And what we've got to do is we've got to create an organization, the people, the processes, those ground truths, using a tool like this to get open, strategic, aligned conversations. Same, still have the leadership. But what we've done is because we've got good operating systems, we are able to bring the strategy and thesis to life through rigor and through discipline. We have this, remember, accountability and communication. The first, we have accountability and it's defined. It's not punitive. It's not, if you don't do your job, you're getting fired. It's not these threats of, if we don't get here by this time, then this is going to happen to you. You need to have that. Things need to be time boxed, but people don't need to be scared about it. What they need to be is clear about it. There's ways to go doing that. Like I said, we've got so much historical transactional data on what needs to happen in a company and how to go about doing that. Let's not spend our IQ points making this harder than it needs to be or coming up with new ways of doing things. Let's use our IQ points instead to innovate and to grow and to get better. Let's not reinvent the wheel, as the saying goes. So these organizations have those levels of communication that are clear down to that next level. It ladders up and it ladders down. We haven't created an organization that is a hub and spoke where the path of least resistance isn't back to one or a few people to get permission, even though we say it's not permission. It's, if you watch it, that's what it is. Once again, listen and watch. We can fool everyone else. Let's not fool ourselves. This is hard enough without doing that. Once again, the sweet little lies. And so the communication and the accountability in the organization looks like that. These companies take off. They don't always necessarily have a better product or service than these companies. They've got to have something that is sound and solid for sure. But because they have gone through the things that we're going to talk about in here and grown towards things. So oftentimes when I meet with companies, they're like, oh man, yeah, that's a crummy drawing, but man, I feel that. We're feeling that. We want to get over there, Kirk. That looks nice. How do you do that? So what they'll say is we kind of know what's happening. They can tell me dynamics of like what's happening, or this person's not doing this, or we go away and we come up with goals, and then 6 months later we've forgotten the goals, they aren't happening, or or maybe we had investors or board members that overlaid goals onto us, and we said yes to those and didn't push back.
Mhm.
And now, don't be mad at the board or investors. They're relying on you to know what to do or not to do. They're there to help inform you. They're there to help represent their LPs and the people that they're there stewarding their resources. And so understand the dance that's going on. So they can usually tell me what's happening,
Mhm.
and they can sure tell me why they want to get over here. Why that's important to them. But the thing that they struggle with a little bit is how. How do you actually make that transition
Mhm.
into those things? That's what this season's about.
Mhm.
That's what this episodes are about.
What's really interesting about this too, the what, I feel like you can burn a lot of time and energy chasing all these different directional arrows too, and trying to piece it together, because context is everything in clarity, right?
Mhm, mhm.
And so the more you're like, oh, well, this person's saying this and this person's not doing this, and you're all you're describing is the situation. But if you try to individually solve those, I think what you're saying, and maybe what you're about to say here in the how, is the road to getting to this clean road up is not trying to individually solve these, but to create a culture where the communication flows.
Yeah, said a different way is we can't deal with the symptoms. We got to deal with the root cause.
Right.
That's the truth. That's why I'm giving you guys the diagnostics that I did in the last episode, in this episode, and then the kind of the how tos, and the rest of this series that we're going to be going through in this season is some of the tips and tricks of what works. That what I want to do is set up a buffet of things that truly do work, that get to the heart of the matter. I remember that CEO saying, "Kirk, you should go help companies. You really can see into the heart of a company." I didn't really understand what he meant by that. I had this visual of this heartbeat inside of that was about all I understood of it. But now I understand those things. And so I want to set up a buffet. And if you went to a buffet, like at a big, and you try to eat every piece of food on there, you'd throw up. You'd throw up the whole entire meal. It'd be miserable.
Mhm.
You never go back. But I'm going through this because I know there's different listeners like, I needed to hear that.
Mhm.
Or that's actually a tool I'm going to go try. I think that'll work.
Mhm.
And to arm people with tools that have unlocked me and the leaders that I've invested with and gotten good fortune to work alongside and learn from. I want to get that out to others. So we're going to talk a lot more about the how on these things. But that aligned leadership, what we're talking about, there's a lot that goes into that. How you drive that clarity, create those informed decisions, to alignment, to decision velocity. And we're always going up and pointing towards some kind of successful exit, whether that's transferring it to the business to your family, or that's going out into the public markets and becoming public, and all the other options in between there.
Mm.
The journey. I want to redefine what success looks like. It's the journey to becoming a level 3. So, an aligned leadership team. The second one is what I call people and process management. All right. So lately the word manager has like a negative connotation. It used to be like when I was little, like everybody wanted to be a manager and everybody wants to be a leader, and that's okay. So, but we're not talking about managing like project management or outcomes management. We're talking about that people and process management.
Mm.
So this is another dynamic that I see in as companies grow, oftentimes when we see like a wrong person in a key position. So we all have some, what I would call technical ability, or that individual contributor. Okay. And that's what got us into doing. You're doing marketing today. I kind of came up through the accounting range, and ended up being a, operations COO and accounting. You may be R&D. You may be somebody that's really particularly gifted in legal, whatever it might be. But we have this comfort zone that when we're in our technical comfort zone, people look to us for guidance.
Mhm.
They start to gravitate towards us because they know that we just have got this gift of being able to see more, see before others. We understand how the pieces on the chess board move around, and we know how to play chess when everyone else is playing checkers. And any company that's going to get out of the ground, and any company that's going to have any kind of success, these people are the heartbeat of the business.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing that as a business starts to grow is we need these people that are really good and gifted at people and process management. So you think about what a person that's good at those things, they're responsible for getting a set of outcomes, right? Whether it's defined through OKRs, job description, whatever, osmosis, whatever it is, there's these outcomes that you were responsible for getting for. And you're giving these resources called people, time, money, and you're the conduit. You're the conduit to getting these outcomes with these resources that you have been given. Well, if I'm not really particularly good at it, what ends up happening is you say, well, if it's going to get done right, I got to do it myself. And so then what ends up happening is you start doing this, but guess what? You start to clog that conduit. And eventually, guess what? Each quarter, those expectations keep climbing, but your resources stay somewhat the same. And at some point, you can't keep up with this, and we start missing quarters.
Mm-hmm.
What's the narrative? Well, I need more people. I need more budget. I need more time.
Mm-hmm.
But you said you could get that done in this time. You said you could do it with that budget. You said you could do it with those people. Well, now I can't. So then we go hire more people, and we get our cost structure out of whack. And then we start missing. And then what happens? There's a RIF, a reduction in force.
Mm-hmm.
These aren't changing. There's a reduction in force, but that's a gift that only gives one time. Because now I got to retool my team. I got to retool the processes. I have not been thinking, predicting, and preparing. Now I'm in full reacting and repairing what has been there. And it's rarely diagnosed. Remember, I said part of these tools is being able to avoid misdiagnosing the problems. It's that we had a people or process manager that had clogged our conduit. Our goals weren't unrealistic unless for some reason the macros changed. And then sometimes you do have to do that, which we talked about in the first episode. But for the most part, so think about the best people and process managers you have ever worked with. People and process. What are some of the characteristics of the best people and process managers you've ever worked with, dreamed about, experienced?
One is really being sensitive to time or being super organized. So dependable that we're going to, if we say we're going to do something, we do it. I see that currently in sustainments org. We've got a bunch of, I think 15% of the company are military, ex-military guys who, West Point grads and serve Army Rangers and Air Force and whatnot. And so they're super militant about, the meeting structure. Do we have too many meetings on the calendar? Are we, what is the agenda? Like, what are the expectations? And then, if we have a task tracker, if you use Monday.com or, whatever your system, which I just described a system, I recognize that. But, whatever we're tracking that in, even if it's just a spreadsheet, or, if we put a due date on the calendar, do we have a culture of and an expectation of, yes, we're going to complete that by that date. And if something is blocking us in the process of that, are we willing to call that out, in a group setting to make sure, hey, yeah, no, I am still working towards this, but, until I get XYZ from XYZ person, I can't complete that task. And then, as a broader group saying, okay, yeah, I can help with this. And can we pull in help from here to make sure we get that done?
Yeah. And so a couple things that are real key that are maybe tucked away in a little bit of what you said is we call the shot, both who's responsible and time. That sets the stage for accountability. Remember, accountability and communication, right? Talked about that in the last little drawing I did. But if there's going to be a blocker, if something happens, then we have that conversation. That's accountability. There's no way anybody's going to 100% be able to say what's going to happen 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now, especially when we don't control all the players on the field. There's things outside of our control. That's reality. It's life. But when we need to renegotiate those things, we still bring who's responsible, time frame, and now we're bringing why. We're bringing the solution, not just like, I'm not going to be able to do that. I see too many times where people sign up for stuff because the culture is such that like no one's really going to bug me about it. Everyone else is kind of slipping on stuff. So they're going to feel weird calling me out because they're not doing it themselves. And so we just have this culture where we sign up for stuff and then we say, oh man, we keep changing our goals, or this is so heavy. And it's a leader's and the manager's responsibility to negotiate those things well up front. And then what accountability looks like is when I'm not going to be able to do those things for whatever reason. And sometimes I just misjudged it, but we're not putting spin or excuses on it. Remember, talked about trust, building conditions of trust. And sometimes we just flat messed up, and that happens too. That's also called life. We renegotiate. That's accountability. One of the things I always tell my leaders in the companies that I invest in and love working with is that, I got on a plane to come down here to do this podcast. And when I got on the plane, I was, calm, excited to get down here. My thought process was, I'm going to get ready for this and, catch up on some emails and do some things. What was not on my mind is like, I wonder if we're actually going to land in Dallas. I wonder if they even know what they're doing or where we're going, or if this plane's going to land. Well, the truth of the matter is planes that are flying are off course 90% of the time, something like that, 85, 90% of the time. But that whole industry is built around that knowledge, around that normalization, that we're going to be off course. So our ground to air communications, the onboard instrumentation, you look in the cockpit of a plane, all these things are built with the knowledge of we're going to be off course, and no one, including the pilot, is ever worried about it. They don't, but what a plane does is have what's called waypoints. So when it's flying from, Denver to Dallas, it has these waypoints. And when it misses a waypoint, it knows how to get back on track to get to the next waypoint, climb, air, whatever it might be. And I'm not worried about it. But oftentimes companies think that they're on course 90% of the time. And then if it feels like they're off, everyone is like all worried, We have waypoints in companies. They're called OKRs or SMART goals or KPIs. Those are our waypoints. This is an opportunity to normalize. We as a company are going to be off course 90% of the time, but we have waypoints. So if I'm saying I'm getting from here to here by this time frame, then that's my destination. We are going to land there, but all the things in between there, we may be off course and we may have to adjust. That's why I hear people start to say, we're always changing our goals. That may be true. Let's discuss that a little bit more. Are we changing our destination, or are we changing our waypoints because we've got better information? And that's where accountability and discussion starts to happen. Do we have a culture where that's okay? Or do we have a culture where like, gosh, we say that they're going to think we're switching goals. They're going to, everyone's going to be tangled up and all upset. And it's like, no, normalize it. Hey, FYI, we're going to be off course 90% of the time. Our destinations, the 3 or 4 things, not the 30 or 40, the 3 or 4 things we said we're going to accomplish by the end of this year, by the end of this quarter, we're committed to. We're going to land that. We're not going to load this plane up and tell people we're going to Dallas and we're going to land up in, the middle of the Indian Ocean and then put spin on it. Say, oh, it's an ocean. Like, everybody brought a bathing suit, right? Like, I'm not doing that. So keep on going here. Yes. So some of these things, they're organized. They have great follow through. They're intentional. They know how to call the shot. They know how to make the shot. What else? What's just give me a couple,
and
couple
even before I add to the list too, one of the things that you just described that I personally feel. So I'm a functional team of one, right? And so marketing, I'm head of marketing, but I'm also the most junior person in marketing as well. I've got agencies and people that we freelance and whatnot to help execute on things, but the idea of renegotiating on the journey. I renegotiate with myself 20 times a day, right? Because ultimately the list of things that we can do to build a global brand, which is one of our key criteria or goals that we have for my job, and to drive sales and marketing and demand and basically just a knowledge of who we are and the problem we solve depending on who we're talking to. The list is like 1,000 things long, and I've got to figure out the 5 important things today that help get me to the 2 or 3 things that we're focused on in the end. And the reality of that is I'm not the only functional team of one in the company, right? We've got other departments that are functional teams of 1 or 2 or 3. And so we feel the struggle. Like this normalizing concept is so crucial, I think, in this part, because we feel the struggle of looking and saying there's 1,000 good ideas and great things we can go tackle today. And people are willing to say, hey, I'll own that because it sounds good and I'd like to control the outcome of that because I've got a
Mm,
vision for it.
mhm,
The downside of that I've run into is that, and I've done this myself, where you raise your hand because it sounds good and you think it can help move the
mhm,
needle, but there's actually like 20 or 30 things that probably should take precedence over
mhm,
that.
mhm,
And in reality, you get nothing done. And so looking at a task list. I think the studies are if you have two or three things on the task list at a time, that you can execute those things. But once you get to like four, five, six, seven things, you actually get none of it done.
yeah, yep, mhm.
You know,
There's all kinds of studies about that. Yeah, yeah, for
yeah.
sure. And that's, once again, we're talking about, and that's that conduit, right? That I'm talking about that conduit. Those people that sit in that responsibility that have been given the authority and just kind of that what I call opportunity to get these goals and with these resources.
Mhm.
That's that conduit that you're talking about. And when it comes to having those renegotiating conversations, what we're talking about here, like this tool, the tool we talked about last time, these aren't just tools that you can use, kind of pull them off the shelf and kind of apply them to this one application. If you can have a tool that helps you guys have better conversations, that kind of primes the pump for this open alignment, kind of strategic discussions, it doesn't just sit there. That bleeds into all things. So when you do have to reprioritize, when you are having to do those things, it's not like the saying of like, I gotta, try to figure out how to wiggle this in, or I gotta, it's like, no, here's what's going on. Here's what's happening. And we cuss and discuss, and we debate. Another thing we're going to talk about is that, that open door, closed mind. That's in one of the upcoming episodes. The next one, I believe, is that resistance to change that's masquerading itself as support. That's
Mhm.
a game, like break the game. But use these tools to, once again, prime the pump to create this cultural, like, hey, we talk about the hard things.
Mhm.
We talk about the real things. We've got historical and transactional data. This isn't unique to us. This is this is part of the deal. Like I said, growth pain is inevitable,
Mhm.
but you can shorten that
Very
by
much
having this
so.
conversation. So
So yeah, I can give you a few more if you
yeah,
want.
yeah.
I'd say an ability to listen.
What?
Ability to
No, I'm
listen.
teasing.
Yeah, yeah. There you go. You got me. That was good. Um, hear what's being said, but also what's not being said.
Yeah.
Some of the most effective. We've got a Monday go to market team call that we have. So we bring in all of go to market, and we have essentially go to market runs a meeting. We've got some product people, a couple other departments that sit on the call as observers that we can
Mhm,
kind of tap into and say, hey, we
mhm,
need help. We're stuck here. They can also weigh in with questions. How are you thinking about that? How did you guys get to that
mhm.
outcome? Did you talk to somebody
Context.
at a trade show? Right. Like, is there anything in that that can help enable us? And
Mhm,
what can we do to help you guys? We do the exact same thing, growth to product, or I mean, excuse me, product to growth, where
mhm,
they come back to us on a biweekly call on Fridays and do the exact same thing. We do road mapping, all that kind of stuff. All that being said, um, we've got our head of HR. She actually operates more as a chief of staff more than
mhm,
anything, and which her job is to hear what's not being said in the room.
mhm.
She's on both of those calls and she's dissecting and saying, okay, I heard you say this, but we've got a task tracker over here that over here says you're going to be doing this as well. Have you thought through how these things
Yep.
conflict? Right.
That's brilliant. And a lot of times, and we've been part of a lot of M&As and exits and things like that. And at the strategy table, we'll have someone that's sitting there. That's their only responsibility, is to hear what's not being said, to read the room, and that is a critical thing. I would venture to guess less than 5%, maybe less than 1% do what you just said, is
Mhm.
intentionally having somebody that's in the meeting, that their intentionality is to help understand where are their broken bridges,
Mhm.
where are their commitments that that when everyone left the room were still sitting on the table that no one
Mhm.
took. Like those are those dangled in. Remember how I was talking about earlier in this episode around, hey, I've told them 10 times. Yeah, but if you asked them once, that person can be that one that can feed it back to you that once.
Mhm.
You're like, there's 5% that got left, and that was an
Mhm.
important 5%. So that's really good.
Mhm.
I'm gonna give one more and we'll kind of keep moving here. Is delegation.
Mhm.
Somebody that really knows how to delegate. They're good, effective delegators. That's kind of the granddaddy of them all when it comes to being a good conduit. I don't delegate stuff I ran out of time to do, or the stuff that I don't like to do. I delegate to somebody's maturity level. I bring them along. One of the things that someone showed me once and is stuck with me is, is it looking good? Is
See, a digital board doesn't crumple like that.
Yeah, but I love this. I love the papers.
I know
We're
you do.
old school. So so you think about, like, you've got a skill. So think about riding a bike. before you ever rode a bike, you were what I call, or what is called, unconsciously incompetent. You didn't know that you didn't know how to ride a bike. Teague, your 20-month-old, does not know that he does not know how to ride a bike.
Right.
But Briggs, your 5-year-old, the first time he got on a bike, he realized he was consciously incompetent. I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And it's very clear. But after a while, he got on it and he wiggled and he became consciously competent. He thought about it and, wiggled underneath him and everything else. But he was consciously competent. He was growing in his skill set. And now he just jumps on it. Briggs does and goes. He's unconsciously competent. He didn't even think about it. Just jumps on it and goes. Let's think about people's skill sets. Some people are unconsciously competent and some people are unconsciously incompetent.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm a manager or a leader, I've got to understand where they are in that. And I may be here, but I've got to remember what it's like to go back to here and bring them through this journey. So when I delegate, I've got to be delegating not just the stuff I don't like do, downtime do, need to get done, but I've got to delegate to somebody's abilities, skill sets, and everything else like that. So thinking about those things.
I love that idea too, because it's almost like the idea of you don't know what you don't know, but also you can't stop with just that statement, right?
Yeah.
Like that's just a pithy statement at the end of the day.
Yeah.
If the leader of the organization isn't willing to say, okay, they don't know what they don't know, how are we going to help them get to the point of not just knowing, but unconsciously being competent and empowering them?
Well, and you think about even in your hiring process, if you're hiring people that are unconsciously incompetent or consciously incompetent, unconsciously incompetent, excuse me, is most high growth organizations are not built to develop people.
Mm-hmm.
The people that are unconsciously competent and proven are oftentimes more expensive, require more equity and do those things, but they also, that comes, with that ability to create that velocity. There's a lot of things we're going to talk about that in future episodes, how to do that, what to look at. But nonetheless, so we could kind of keep going with this list. Let's, but there's a handful of things. Well, what do we typically do with these people, these, what I call these technicians or these individual contributors that are functionally excellent in our organization? They're kind of our go-to people. As the organization grows, what do we typically do with these individuals?
Go and put them in positions of power.
Yeah, we promote them, right?
Yep.
We promote them before they're leadership ready.
Mm-hmm.
So what it takes to be a great IC, these are a totally different set of skills. A lot of these are behavioral type of skills. Some of these skills we can teach. We can teach somebody how to delegate. Sure, you can take a course on how to be a good listener and everything else like that, but some of these are really, trained and ingrained things that are hard. And so what ends up happening is we promote people and people say, oh man, Kirk, I get it. We've done that. We've hired, put people in, it didn't work, didn't quite come together. Mm-hmm. And then they go out and get somebody with this incredible resume. They wrote this job description that is really not a job description. It's more of a marketing tool. And they bring the people in and it just doesn't work. Mm-hmm. It still doesn't work. And what happened is they promoted or hired someone else that had been promoted or hired in another organization incorrectly, but now they can put it on their resume. Now they can talk about it. They've gone to the classes, they've read the books, but they still don't have a way of proving those things. So the other one is what I call that leader. So that leader is that person that just trusts that gut intuition. Everybody, has the ability to be a great leader, I believe. Somebody that inspires people when they walk in the room, not because they're so charismatic, but because they're trusted and they're credible and they're convicted on doing those things. Well, about 1% of people are just born with that natural kind of ability to do that. About, I'd say, this is about 9% of people. And this is about 90% of people. So about 90% of people just have that ability to really be great at something. About 9% just naturally have to do this, and about 1% this. And you're saying, well, you're telling me that I can't become a great manager because it's only 9%. I don't have it. No, I'm saying it takes a lot of work and a lot of intentionality. Most high growth companies don't build that intentionality of building out great managers. They think they're going to hire them along the way, but they hire someone else's technician or individual contributor that got incorrectly promoted in another organization, and then it just doesn't work, and it starts to slow down, weigh down, and burden the organization. And so how do we go about, what's our intention? We're going to be talking about this in future episodes. once again, is how do we go about making sure that we are truly getting people that we're not just promoting functional excellence over leadership readiness.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another piece of this. And then the third part of this is our systems and processes. So I'm going to talk a little bit I'm going to go back to the people part of things. No one ever draws their org structure this way, but oftentimes when we have an organization where we have people that are functionally excellent, but are in leadership and management roles, no one ever draws their organization this way, but this is the way it ends up functioning. So you've got, maybe the CEO here. That's the organization.
I've seen one of those in my garage.
Yeah, it's called a rake organization.
Yep.
And remember what I said, typically the people that are in these roles, the founder, leadership, CEO roles, are typically great, at the technical components and really understand either the R&D, the product, development, or they're great market builders, but they're typically not great people and process managers. At least that's not the highest and best use. But what does this organization make them become when you have this many people reporting to you?
I mean, it slows you down significantly.
What does it make you become? It makes you start to use what is not your gifting. It makes you become a people and process manager.
Right.
You're no longer doing the technician. And now it feels like you've got the weight of the world. I got so many balls in the air and they're dropping. Sometimes I'll see where somebody recognizes that and they'll just move the rake somewhere else, under somebody else, but they're still this rake.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so org structure drives behavior. This drives one set of behaviors. This creates a hub and spoke. This creates where the path of least resistance is back to this person. And that's where, once again, that's clogging the conduit. And so, we've got to get the effect of whatever, there's not a right org structure, but we're going to talk about this once again. I keep saying this, I know. In a future episode, we're going to get down into the details of this stuff. Is, what is the right structure? What is the right behavior that needs to, happen over here? How does my org structure expand and contract? Because the market's changed, customers' behaviors change, those kind of things. How does it expand and contract? Notice no names in the boxes. We get clear on what's needed here. And then we weave a name back to it and we say, can they do that or not? And maybe the answer is not perfectly, but now I know where to coach them. But when you leave names in here, you unintentionally start to write the job descriptions and the responsibilities to fit that whoever's name is in that box. We're going to talk more about that.
Yeah.
The other piece of it is I talk about is the systems and processes. And one of the things I look at in an organization when I go into it, what I start to see is this is a dynamic that creates people to start telling themselves those sweet little lies that turn into those little bitty doubts that grow into the big whopper lies that burden us and threaten our ability to lead. But if this is either cash or revenue, depending upon if you're a business that's already profitable and growing and it's revenue, it's revenue. If you're a company that's not profitable but is in a growth mode and is consuming cash, this line represents cash. The red represents our costs or our expenses. And so sometimes you see where it's doing like this. This right here is not a very fun time. I call that going through the gap or the eye of the needle. And what ends up happening is that's when things get really, really stressful. That's when you start to see rifts. And what ends up happening oftentimes is the companies go back and they get smaller. And they lick their wounds. They kind of say, is this person or this process or we got away from our knitting. We need to get back focused. There's all the kind of language that gets wrapped in it. And they go back and they kind of fix some things and they get back into that comfort zone and they go back up. And because they haven't really fixed these things and understood those things, but they, so they end up doing this up and down, up and down. And I've drawn this and people say, oh, we haven't done that. And I said, well, let's pull out your last 7 or 8 years of financials and look. And they're looking at it like, it's exactly what we've been doing. It's okay to do. It's just an emotional roller coaster. It's not much fun. If you're venture back or private equity back, they're not going to let you do that.
You also burn a lot of time.
for a lot of this time right here, and you're kind of spiraling. But if you're venture back, private equity back, if you got good investors that are leaning in and caring, they're not going to let you keep doing that for too long before they want to fix that. So we come to this next point, this crisis point. And what do you think happens when companies are experiencing what I call going through the gap or that eye of the needle?
Culture is probably deteriorating.
Culture's deteriorating. We're usually identifying or diagnosing the wrong problems. The discussions, this is where we're starting to put spin on it. Hey, everyone knows you need oxygen at 24,000 feet, type of thing, or whatever the case may be. And then everyone's got a solution that they want to fix things. Some people think it's thesis, some people think it's execution. So, it's all over the place. It can be. Doesn't have to be, but it can be. And it oftentimes is. Well, there's very sophisticated investors out there that look for companies that are in the gap. They don't maybe call it that or the eye of the needle. That's not a technical term you're going to learn in school. Is something I came up with, but they look for companies, and you know what? They come in and they say, "Man, I get it. Like, it's hard raising money. The macroeconomics, the markets are really, really tough. And isn't it hard to find good people? Like, we've got a host of great people, like, on our team or whatever the case may be. Or, you know what, we're going to help, relieve some of this burden. We're going to be able to get you a nice little return. Common may not see much, but you're going to get something. I've been part of and heard these kinds of conversations. And they pick up the company for pennies on the dollar. And guess what they want to do when they come in? They will put in an aligned leadership team that will get the right people and process managers so the business can handle the weight of the truth and the weight of scale. And these two, the aligned leadership team and the people and process, they will put in the systems and processes that allow us to scale. And then what they do is they get the cost structure headed the right way, and they get the revenues or the cash aligned, and they create
all new kind of gap
and an opportunity there. Once again,
that's so interesting. Yeah, it is the idea of ownership group coming in basically to get cost in line while also bringing the revenue back in line or cash back in line, however you described it. Is that jarring? Like the change that is required to come into a company? Is it easy to be like, oh my gosh, like they're just coming in and changing everything? Or is that almost, I know it's necessary, right? But like, what is that even like?
Well, it's what you might imagine, right? That's why I want to get people closer to the truth, because what they're doing is they're coming in from an unemotional standpoint. People think, oh man, they're just capitalists or this or that. No, they're living in a higher level of truth and experience that when I slam my finger in the car door, it hurts. I'm not going to keep doing that. And so they come in and they put the right team in the place, and they put, and it changes the culture, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse.
Right.
It happens, but it isn't just about these, their eyeballs are just like, like slot machines where the dollars are rolling. So like they know what it takes. They've got that historical and transactional data. Well, guess what? If you're running a company today, you have the same access to it, but are you going to afford yourself it? Are you going to study these kind of tools? Are you going to help normalize the journey? Are you going to live closer to a truth? Are you going to, and it's not just you has to do it. You have to get your whole organization on board and understand that we are going to do these. Some of the things that are indicators of success, redefining the success is in the journey, is we are going to have a right idea about a wrong person. So we're going to have, like, Houston, we have a rake organization. What are we going to do about it? All things that, once again, we're going to be talking about.
So in the gap, then is it safe to say that change is necessary? You just get to decide if you're making the change or someone else, or?
I would say that change is inevitable. Change is going to happen. Growth, however, is a choice. And so are we going to grow our way through this? And a lot of times, the option is we've got to find a safe harbor. We've got to get out of this storm. We got to get somebody that knows how to do these things, that knows what it means to put in an aligned leadership team, what it means to do this, what systems and processes do we need? How do we create these systems of prioritization? Those kind of things. I'm not saying that all those organizations are dripping in truth and honesty and everything we want and everything else like that. But what I am saying is they are living closer to what the truth is, that what needs to happen, and doing those things. So the reason that only 10% of companies make this transition from a level 2 to a level 3, that professionally managed and led, that organization that is still entrepreneurial, but is investor attractive, valuable, scalable. The reason only 10% of the companies, because this is really, we're talking about people issues. I would say most of the time when I'm working with a company and there's problems, they want to go fix a process. They want to get another piece of software. They want to, and sometimes that's the right answer, but sometimes it's a people issue. And we're going to, once again, I want to talk a lot more about that in upcoming episodes, because, this is emotionally tough. You're asking me about feeling, how this feels. This is tough. You've got a good friend here, but it's time for him to go. You've got somebody that's been loyal, somebody that's functionally excellent here, but their leadership is not ready. But the company's growing and it needs it. And we're going to bring someone over top that person, and they're going to learn from them. They're going to grow from them. And they're going to benefit from them. But we're not going to hand it out. Loyalty is not a leadership skill. I mean, you need to be loyal.
Yeah.
Some of the best leaders I know are loyal, but how you apply that differences. So the goal is to become what we call this, and that's where, we do have a good organization in place, organizational structure, that we have the right people in the right roles. It's always, messing with a little bit here and there. You're always, evolving or changing a little bit there. We've got good systems and processes to be able to call the shot and make the shot. You say, what's the difference between a level 2 and a level 3? Well, there's a lot of characteristics, and that's why I want people to be able to download this so they can, once again, not read it and just kind of absorb it, but they can use this as a team tool to cause, once again, open, aligned discussions. Where do you think we're at? Why do you think this? Do you think we're experiencing this? Oh man, I didn't know that. Oh yeah, we definitely are. Once again, it's not to just define where you are, like taking a test in school. It's to start practicing the habit of openness, alignment, the things that we need, reducing fear, growing credibility, reducing anxiety, increasing focus. That's what we're talking about here. So, so that's the reason only 10% of companies actually make this transition to what we call this level 3. This is the goal. This is what success looks like. And there's a journey that goes along with that. And that's, this is a tool that I wanted to get out in this episode, this resource that I want people to be able to download and use and ask questions about. Is something, once again, these diagnostic tools we're going to quickly be moving into. Let's get into the how-to. And I hope people, honestly, I hope people reach out to me on LinkedIn or through the website or whatever the case may be, if they have questions about this stuff. I can't anticipate everything everybody's thinking here.
Right.
All I can do is share my experiences and hope that they resonate. And if I can do something to help, then I want to help.
Yeah, I think that's the goal here, right? You said this earlier, and just to reemphasize this, is that you're really pouring. Yeah, feel free to come sit back down here. You're really pouring your life's work into this season here. I know you're holding no punches back when you're sharing this information and really just trying to teach, right? But this is an open invitation to come connect with you. And that invitation could be as light as, hey, post that comment, share that question, send us that email, or, bring Kirk to come speak to this event or this group of people to share these thoughts with them, or, even deeper, right? Like, hey, I actually would love if you came to one of our offsites, or if we could explore coaching, what that would look like. So I know that you're open to that and appreciate that. The other thing I'd say, just to go back, this is just,
sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no,
I want to
you're
emphasize that is not the purpose of this podcast,
Right.
is that happens. Obviously, yes. Do I like to work with good, talented people? Do I like to share what my experiences are? Do I get a helper's high from coming alongside people? Absolutely, I do. But we're not going to be dangling carrots. We're going to be dropping morsels of just really good stuff that has worked and worked consistently in the messy metal.
Yeah, no, I love that. 30 years of that. To go back to one of the things that you said here, you talked about loyalty, right? Like the idea of having to remove people from the organization and how hard that could be, right? this is kind of funny, but I mean, they are an organization. They're actually very professionally managed and led, to go back to this
Uh-huh.
great resource here. The Green Bay Packers, no greater organization than the Green Bay Packers,
Yeah,
right?
no bias there, right?
Yeah, no bias whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I'm going to start to sound like a Cowboys fan here when I say that I think that this is the year. But anyway, the the head coach of the Packers, who actually, like, if you go look, and the Packers have had some historic coaches all the way back to Vince
Mhm,
Lombardi,
mhm.
right? Who now, Super Bowl trophy is lovingly
Yeah,
named
yeah.
after Titletown here. Um, the head coach,
We can edit this part, right?
yeah, no, this has to stay. Matt LaFleur, the head coach right now. So he hired defensive coordinator. His defensive coordinator was a coach that he grew up with in the ranks and is a personal best friend of
Mhm,
his from the Los Angeles Rams. And he came out of the Sean McVay tree,
mhm.
which is
Yeah.
storied right now
Mhm,
in the NFL. Brought him in to come run the defense of the Green Bay Packers. He gave him 3, I think 4 years, and then got to the conclusion that he had to go fire his best friend. And not only that, the reason he was firing him is because he wasn't just saying that you're not doing a good enough job with the defense we have, but that we actually systematically need to go change the formation that we run if we're going to go become a top tier defense in this league.
mhm, mhm,
And so he fired his best friend, and he's been on record saying that's one of the hardest things he's done in his entire career of
mhm,
coaching. Um, Made a risky move, changing the formation, which alienated some of the current players. So one of the best players, Preston Smith, on the
mhm,
Green Bay Packers, he's top 10 all time sacks in the Packers organization all time.
mhm.
We ended up trading him to the Pittsburgh Steelers for peanuts, a
Uh-huh.
seventh round draft pick, because he no longer fit the new scheme. Right. So we
Yep.
disrupted culture, changed the organization, fired a best friend. What the Packers did then is they brought in the head coach from Boston College, Jeff Hafley.
Mhm,
He's now running that formation, new formation. Basically went out and drafted a bunch of really young,
mhm,
skilled guys, and we have some of the more talented younger guys in the league.
mhm,
And the Packers defense now went from like somewhat respectable to one of our greatest strengths,
mhm.
frankly. With we've got a budding quarterback in Jordan Love and great wide receiver room, a lot of young guys. Savion Williams, TCU
Mhm.
now joining the mix, which is fun.
Yep.
But anyway, all that to say is that it started with him being willing to move past the point of loyalty to go disrupt the system,
Mhm,
to bring in someone, which, by the way, it's very disruptive to take a college head coach and make
mhm.
them a NFL defensive coordinator. Like,
Yeah.
he stepped down from a head coaching job to do that, and then go bring in young talent, which requires a lot of great hiring
Mhm.
to go make that happen. But ultimately, directionally, again, maybe I sound like a Cowboys fan here, but I think this is working.
Yeah. Well, um, once again, to maybe untuck a couple pieces of that, the story is an inspiring example, and the hardships and the difficulty that comes with that. But some pieces to maybe untuck from that, as you said, he was willing to go beyond loyalty, but in the name of what? And my guess is, and my experience would tell me, and this is true of companies, I mean, in the NFL, you have a pretty good feedback loop week
Mhm.
in and week out. And by the end of the season, you've got a pretty good feedback loop whether your thing is working. And then you get an off season to try to fix it. Unfortunately, businesses don't. The feedback loop is not as fast, and you don't get an off season to fix it.
That's a great
But
call out. Yeah.
but that all being said, what you do get is is we've got these people, and they deserve respect. They deserve to be poured into. They deserve sometimes to be let go from the organization because there's a better opportunity for them, and leaving them in their role is not fair to them, not fair to the organization. But we can see people. They have families, they have lives, they have ups and downs. But what people forget is the business, whether it's an NFL franchise, a donut shop, or a Fortune 500 company. The
Mhm.
business is a legal person
Mhm.
in the sense it has its own tax ID, but it doesn't have its own voice. It doesn't go home to its family at night.
Mhm.
It doesn't come and unpack its problems for you. It silently sits there and serves us. And as leaders, Matt, in your example, name the investor, the venture capital, the private equity, the CEO, the VP of name them. They've got a responsibility to advocate for that person
Mhm.
called the business. And if you understand what it is, and we're all collectively aligned on this is what this person is here to do and to serve, and we're here to advocate and to listen to it, then it's not any easier to let your best friend go, but your best friend should understand it's because this is what's needed. And I've seen this happen. I've had it happen to me personally. Guess what? They don't walk out the door like smiling. They walk out the door mad sometimes
Mm-hmm.
and hurt, confused, feeling taken advantage of. But I've also seen where 6, 9 months, a year later, they come back and say, wow, thank you. That was a necessary ending. It's a great book called Necessary Endings by Henry Cloud. I'd suggest anybody
I'll put that
read
one
that.
on the list. I haven't
Yeah,
read that one.
it's really good. Doesn't make it easier, but if we don't advocate for that higher purpose, and that's part of what he was doing. He wasn't just letting his best friend go, and saying, hey, let's throw this against the wall and see if it sticks. Sure, he was trying something he didn't know for sure was going to work, but he knew what he had wasn't working.
Mm.
He was willing to take the risk to be the best version of what the organization, he was willing to diagnose the misalignment between talent and trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
so
No,
that's a good example.
Yeah. Well, I guess to dig one level deeper on that too, what Matt saw, his name is Joe Barry, is the guy who was previous defensive coordinator. I'm pretty sure on this, so I'll have to fact check myself after this, but I think Joe had never made it more than 3 years on any stop. And Matt gave him that 4th year. And you could argue that Matt saw something in him that no one else was willing to see. And even though it didn't work out, I think that Matt believed in Joe as a person. And that's that 4U leader mindset. So the Green Bay Packers, great example of a 4U leaders organization. That's my takeaway here. Okay, so real quick, let's wrap this up. A lot of information here, a lot of conversations. Try to whittle this down. What are the 1 or 2 things, or what's the one action item that a listener could take out of this conversation?
Yeah. So one action item. There's hopefully there's more than one. And hopefully someone has heard something and sparked something that maybe stirred something that was maybe sitting a little bit dormant, and listen to that. Listen, if you trick yourself a little bit, take your business out to dinner. What is it telling you? Listen to that. So the one action is I would have people, honestly, I would have them download this PDF, not because I want them to download something from us. Honestly, it's because it's a tool that I want people to have in their hands to create
I don't know what shot we're on.
Yeah, exactly.
It's there.
is to use it as a team tool to really help people to understand and start to identify where their company's at, cause good conversations about where they're at in the stages of growth, look at the characteristics, look at the problems that happen at each phase, and just cause good, thoughtful conversations. Once again, start to watch and see. And guess what? It's also like holding up a mirror. If the room's a little bit silent, a little bit reserved, maybe isn't forthcoming, maybe it's talking about the symptoms that we were talking about versus the root cause, that's okay. That's just where you're at. Once again, growth pain is inevitable. Misdiagnosing the problem is an option. Making it go longer than it should, making the road trip to hell a daily trip instead of a day trip, that's optional.
Yeah.
But don't get frustrated. Don't get disappointed. Don't get worn down. You're in the journey.
Yeah.
You're not wrong. You're just growing.
Right.
That's what I hope people take from this.
Well, normalizing the journey, what is normal, what is not, for companies that get and stay on top. You can get this in the show notes for us. We'll have this linked in there, or go to our website, dandoadvisors.com. Kirk, thanks for sharing, not just about this resource and the resources here on your lovely easel pad, but also just, how do businesses and leaders not just get to the top, but stay on top? And this resource, this business growth lifecycle, as well as this PDF, are great ways to do that. So thank you for sharing today. I'm
thank you very much. And I'm having fun with this. I hope people do reach out and help us get better.
Right.
Because we need that too. And hopefully, we'll listen to we'll be good listeners.
Right.
And if people reach out and help us say, hey, you're going to talk about this, or why didn't you talk about this? Or I disagree with that, whatever it is.
Yep.
Let's get it going.
Yep.
Let's climb.
Let's climb. I love it. Awesome.
In this episode, we looked at the full journey to build a level 3 company and what it takes to scale with intentionality. But even the best strategy will stall if the wrong people are in the wrong seats. In episode 3, we dive into the emotional heart of growth, your team. We'll explore the first 3 warning signs of success, Right idea, wrong person. Professionalizing mediocrity, and open door, closed mind. If you've ever struggled with knowing when to move someone out of their role, question whether loyalty was getting in the way of leadership, or felt the silent resistance of someone who says they're on board but blocks change, don't miss this one. Because growing a company isn't just about calling the shot, it's about having the right people to make that shot.
Thank you for tuning in to the For You Leaders podcast with Kirk Dando. If this episode helped you think more clearly or act more decisively, that's good. But the journey doesn't stop there. Subscribe for more content on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, or go to Kirk's website at kirkdando.com to inquire about coaching opportunities. Now think of a friend, family member, or business leader in your life. How could you help normalize their journey today? Share this podcast with them. We hope that this sparks meaningful conversations in your life and that it enables you to become the leader that you aspire to be.